66%. That is the number the Watchtower does not want you to think about. 66% of the people raised as Jehovah's Witnesses in the United States do not stay. By the time they become adults, 2 out of every 3 are gone. Not on vacation, not inactive, gone. No longer identifying with the religion that shaped their childhood, their family dinners, their weekends, their future, their God. That number comes from the Pew Research Center. It is not activist data. It is not ex-member speculation. It is the largest religious survey ever conducted in the United States. And when Pew compared every major faith tradition in the country, Jehovah's Witnesses came in last, dead last, the lowest retention rate of any religion measured. But here is where the story gets strange. Because when most people leave a religion, you can usually tell where they went. Catholics become Protestants. Protestants become Baptists. Baptists become spiritual but not religious. There is a trail, a path, a forwarding address. With former Jehovah's Witnesses, the trail goes cold. They do not flood into other churches. They do not form ex-witness congregations on the corner. They do not show up, en masse, at Sunday services down the street. Many of them step out of the Kingdom Hall for the last time, and then, to the outside world, they simply vanish. So where do they go? That is the question this video is going to answer, not with rumors, but with the actual studies that have tracked these people. And by the end, you are going to understand something most documentaries about Jehovah's Witnesses completely miss. Because the real story is not that they leave. The real story is what leaving actually costs. Part 1. The number that does not make sense. Let's start with the math that stops sociologists in their tracks. That 66% number? It comes from the Pew Research Center, the largest religious survey ever conducted in the US. And when they compared every major faith tradition, Jehovah's Witnesses came in dead last, the lowest retention rate of any religion measured. For comparison, around 85% of people raised Hindu remained Hindu. Around 75% of those raised Muslim remained Muslim. Protestants, taken as a whole, held on to roughly 65% of their children. Catholics held on to about 59%. Even Mormons, another high-demand religion often compared to Jehovah's Witnesses, retained around 64%. And then there were the Witnesses, 34%. That is all that was left. Only about 1 in 3 people raised as Jehovah's Witnesses in the United States still identified as one in adulthood, which means 66% had walked away. Let that sink in for a moment. 2 out of 3. Now, the Watchtower likes to highlight its growth statistics at every annual meeting. Baptisms in the millions, new Kingdom Halls opening in remote countries, memorial attendance climbing year after year. But here is what the annual report never shows you. Between 2011 and 2020, the organization recorded over 2.5 million baptisms worldwide. And yet the actual increase in active publishers during that same decade was only a little over 1 million. Even accounting for natural deaths, that leaves more than 1 million people who were baptized, counted, celebrated in an assembly, and then quietly disappeared from the rolls. Think about what that looks like in a single congregation. The average Kingdom Hall has around 80 to 100 publishers. Over a decade, that hall might baptize 15 new members, feel proud of its growth, and never publicly acknowledge that 12 others walked out the side door and never came back. The incoming and the outgoing are almost equal. The only thing that changes is who is missing. Sociologists have a name for this pattern. They call it masked churn, a stable number on the outside, hiding a river of people flowing in and out underneath. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Because a religion that loses 2/3 of its children is not winning. It is bleeding. Slowly, quietly, and invisibly. Unless you know where to look. Part 2. The collapse of identity numbers. Explain the scale. They do not explain the cost. To understand what actually happens to a person who leaves this religion, you have to understand what the religion asks of them while they are still inside. And here is where researchers who have studied Jehovah's Witnesses from the outside start using language that almost sounds clinical. In 2022, the Journal of Religion and Health published a study with a title that reads more like poetry than academia. Grieving the Living, the Social Death of Former Jehovah's Witnesses. The researchers sat down with former members in their own homes and asked them a simple question. What did leaving actually feel like? One woman, referred to in the study only as Claire, described growing up in the religion from the age of 5. When asked what being a witness meant to her, she said something that lands like a hammer. She said, "It was where I belonged." Another woman, called Sue in the paper, went further. She called the religion her tribe. And a third, Joanne, summed up the entire culture of isolation in a single sentence. She said, "You are taught to have no friends outside the religion, not discouraged, taught." From childhood, a witness is trained to see the outside world as spiritually dangerous. School friendships are limited because classmates are bad association. Sleepovers are discouraged. Birthday parties are forbidden. College is considered risky because it exposes young people to evolution, philosophy, and critical thinking. Career ambition is quietly frowned upon because the end of the world is always just around the corner, and your time is better spent knocking on doors than building a retirement plan. Romance outside the faith is strictly forbidden. Even the music on your phone, the movies in your queue, the books on your shelf, all of it is filtered through one question. Does this honor Jehovah, or does it come from Satan's world? Think about what that produces over 20 or 30 years. A person whose entire sense of self has been built inside a closed system. A person who has never had to ask the question most people ask in their teenage years. Who am I, really, apart from what I was told to be? A person for whom the religion has not simply supplied beliefs, it has supplied the blueprint for being a human being. So when that person finally decides to leave, they are not just changing churches. They are pulling a thread that unravels the entire fabric of their life, their community, their purpose, their memories, their future, even their private relationship with God. Because the God they learned to love was filtered through Watchtower magazines and circuit overseers and district conventions. Psychologists who work with former high-control religious members describe this moment with a phrase that sounds dramatic until you live it. They call it the collapse of the self. The old identity is gone, and no new one has arrived yet. In the space between, there is only silence, and that silence is where the 66% are often hiding. Part 3. The price of shunning. There is one word that explains, more than any other, why people who leave this religion so rarely go anywhere else. Shunning. If you grew up in a normal church and you stopped attending, your mother might be sad. Your old pastor might call once. An aunt might send a Christmas card asking how you are. Life would go on, painfully perhaps, but it would go on. Inside the Jehovah's Witness world, leaving does not work that way. The Watchtower teaches that members who are formally expelled or who publicly renounce the faith must be treated as if they no longer exist. Family members are instructed to cut off contact. Friends are instructed to walk past them in public without speaking. Even a simple hello at the supermarket is considered a spiritual compromise. Parents stop calling their own children. Siblings block each other. Wedding invitations are never sent. Funerals are attended, if at all, from a distance, with the former member standing alone at the back of the room. And this is not extremist interpretation. This is the official policy, repeated in the organization's own publications for decades, defended at press conferences, and tested in courtrooms around the world. In the Norwegian case that went public in 2024, the government stripped Jehovah's Witnesses of their state registration as a religious community, specifically citing the shunning of former members, including minors, as a violation of their right to free exit from a religion. In March of this year, while the governing body quietly changed its blood policy to allow autologous transfusion in certain cases, the shunning policy remained untouched. It is the load-bearing wall of the entire system. Everything else can be adjusted. That cannot. The academic literature on this is brutal in its honesty. Researchers describe shunning as a form of social death. Not metaphorical, functional. You are alive, your heart beats, your lungs work. But to the people who raised you, held you, prayed with you, and shaped every memory of your childhood, you are already buried. Let me give you a picture of what this actually looks like. Imagine a woman in her 50s. Her name does not matter, because there are thousands of her. Let us call her Rachel. Rachel was baptized at 14, married a witness at 19, raised 3 children in the faith, and spent 40 years at her local Kingdom Hall. Then, in her early 50s, after reading the organization's own old literature, she started asking questions that no elder could answer. Questions about 1914, questions about the failed predictions of 1975, questions about why former members who spoke publicly were treated as enemies. Within 6 months of voicing those questions, Rachel was called before a judicial committee of 3 men in a back room of the Kingdom Hall. She was disfellowshipped. The following Sunday, the announcement was read from the platform in one sentence. Rachel is no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses. No explanation, no appeal in public. Just that. The next morning, her own mother stopped answering the phone. Her 2 married daughters blocked her on every app. Her grandchildren, whom she had seen every weekend for years, were told that Grandma had chosen Satan over Jehovah. One of them, a 7-year-old, sent her a drawing with a heart on it. The drawing was intercepted and thrown away. Rachel found out about it 2 years later, from a cousin who had also left. Rachel is not a character from a novel. She is a composite of dozens of testimonies that have been documented in sociological studies, in court filings, in the Australian Royal Commission on Institutional Responses to Child Abuse, in the Pennsylvania Grand Jury investigation, and in the files of ex-witness advocacy organizations around the world. The details change. The pattern does not. And here is the part the statistics cannot capture. For people like Rachel, the moment they lose the religion is also the moment they lose every single human being they have ever been close to. Overnight, without negotiation, without closure. Imagine trying to walk into a new church carrying that weight. Imagine trying to introduce yourself to a new community of friends when the last community you belonged to erased you for asking a question. Imagine learning to pray again after the people you used to pray with refused to look at you in the produce aisle. Most of the 66% are not running towards something else. They are crawling away from something that nearly destroyed them. And the distance they are crawling takes years. Part 4. Why they do not simply switch churches. When Pew Research tracked where former witnesses actually end up, the answer was messy. Some affiliate with other Christian denominations. Some become spiritual but not religious. A significant share end up in the category researchers call the knowns, religiously unaffiliated, neither atheist nor believer, just unattached. But what the surveys cannot show you, and what the interviews with former members make painfully clear, is why that migration is so slow, so messy, and so often incomplete. There are 4 reasons, and they show up again and again in the testimonies. The first is fear of other religions. From the moment a witness can understand language, they are taught that every other faith on earth is part of something the Bible calls Babylon the Great, a corrupt, satanic system doomed to be destroyed by God at Armageddon. Catholics are deceived. Evangelicals are deceived. Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, Hindus, every single one of them, deceived. When you spend 30 or 40 years being told that every other church is literally a trap set by Satan himself, you do not simply walk across the street on a Sunday morning and try a new one. The fear does not switch off the day you hand in your resignation. One former member, quoted in a British study, described driving past a Methodist church 3 weeks after leaving. She said her hands started shaking on the steering wheel. She kept driving. It took her another 4 years before she walked into any religious building of any kind. And when she finally did, it was a Unitarian service, chosen specifically because it had almost nothing in common with what she had been taught to fear. The second is spiritual trauma. Many who leave do not just lose trust in an organization, they lose trust in the very idea of religious authority. Some lose trust in the Bible itself, because the Bible was used against them. Some lose trust in prayer, because they spent years begging God to make their doubts go away, and the doubts only grew louder. A few lose trust in God entirely. The wound is not doctrinal, it is relational. How do you love a God whose earthly representatives told your mother to stop answering your phone calls? The third is the absence of structure. A witness does not simply attend meetings. They live inside a schedule. 2 meetings a week, every week, for a lifetime. Field service on Saturday mornings, personal Bible study, family worship night, assemblies twice a year, memorial every spring, conventions in the summer. When that structure disappears, so does the rhythm of daily life. Many former members describe the first year out as a kind of free fall, not liberation, weightlessness. Suddenly your Saturdays are empty, your Sundays are empty. The phone does not ring with reminders about the meeting. Nobody is counting your hours. And weightlessness, it turns out, is terrifying when you have never experienced it before. And the fourth reason, maybe the most important one, is slow reconstruction. Most people who leave this religion do not instantly become anything. They become a project, a long, quiet, private project of rebuilding a self from the ground up. New friends, built one at a time, often awkwardly, because you are relearning how normal people talk about normal things. New routines that do not involve a briefcase full of magazines. New opinions, because you are allowed to have them now, and you do not know which ones are yours and which ones were installed. New ideas about what Sunday mornings are for. New ways of celebrating your child's birthday, which you were never allowed to celebrate before. That project can take 5 years, sometimes 10, sometimes a lifetime. They do not vanish. They go underground. And underground is where the real work happens. Part 5. Where they actually go. So if you could follow the 66% into their new lives, what would you actually see? You would see a woman in her 40s, sitting in her car in a church parking lot on a Sunday morning, watching people walk in with their children, too afraid to follow them, finally driving home and crying the whole way. The next week she tries again. The week after that, she actually walks in. 4 years later, she is the one greeting new visitors at the door. You would see a young man, 26 years old, who deletes every Watchtower app from his phone in a single afternoon, and then lies awake for 6 months afterward, every creaking sound in his apartment convincing him that Armageddon has finally arrived, and he will not survive it. Eventually the nightmares stop. He goes back to college. He becomes a nurse. He never talks to his parents again, because they will not take his calls, but he sends them a birthday card every year anyway, just in case. You would see a grandmother, 90 years a witness, quietly reading banned history books in the back of a public library because the questions she has about 1914 cannot be asked at the Kingdom Hall without getting her called in front of the elders. She never formally leaves. She just stops believing. She keeps showing up to meetings because her whole family is still in, and leaving would mean losing them at 90 years old. She is one of thousands of silent doubters the surveys will never reach. You would see a former elder, 52 years old, who gave 20 years of unpaid service to the congregation and who now works as a plumber because he never got the education the organization discouraged. He joins a support group on a private Reddit forum. He meets other ex-elders. For the first time in his adult life, he has friends who are not assigned to him. You would see teenagers who were raised inside the faith, turning 18, moving out, and quietly letting the meeting attendance drop. Nobody formally disfellowships them. They just drift. They become what the organization calls inactive. In the Watchtower's own internal language, they are still witnesses. In reality, they are gone. And in Pew's data, they show up as part of that 66%. You would see some of them eventually find faith again. A softer, smaller, quieter faith. Not the blueprint version they were handed as children, but something they chose themselves for the first time in their lives. Some become Catholic, strangely enough, drawn to the ancient weight of a tradition that has been around for 2,000 years instead of 150. Some become evangelical Christians, finding warmth in communities where they are allowed to cry during a song. Others become agnostic, gently and without drama. Some embrace secular life completely, relieved to put down a burden they never knew they were carrying. And you would see unmistakably that most of them are not chasing paradise anymore. They are chasing something much smaller and much harder. They are trying to feel normal again, trying to eat dinner without guilt, trying to watch a movie without checking whether Jehovah would approve, trying to make a friend without wondering if that friend will one day be declared spiritually dangerous, trying to call their own mother on a Tuesday afternoon and hear her voice say hello instead of nothing at all. This is where the 66% go. Not into another church. Into the long, quiet, unglamorous work of learning how to be a person again. The real story is not that 66% of people raised as Jehovah's Witnesses walk away. The real story is why, for so many of them, leaving feels less like freedom and more like falling. Because when a religion spends a lifetime teaching you that everything outside of it is darkness, the first step into that darkness does not feel brave. It feels like drowning. And the people on the shore, the ones who raised you, the ones who baptized you, the ones who called you family, are not reaching out to help. They have been told, officially, in print, from the platform, to turn their backs until you either come back or die. That is the cost the statistics never show you. A number like 66% sounds clean. It fits on a slide. It gets repeated in news articles. But every single percentage point is a human being who had to choose between their conscience and their entire world, and then had to figure out, alone, how to survive that choice. Here is the part the Watchtower will never tell you at a convention. Many of those who disappear are not lost at all. They are not drifting. They are not spiritually dead. They are doing something the organization could never teach them how to do. They are learning to exist without fear, learning to ask questions without being punished, learning that a life without constant surveillance from men in suits is not the end of the world. It is the beginning of one. The 66% did not vanish. They escaped. And maybe the real question is not where do they go. Maybe the question is this: if you are one of them, or if you love someone who is, What kind of life are you trying to build after leaving? What did it cost you? What did it give back? And what do you wish someone had told you in those first terrifying months on the outside? Write it in the comments. Not for me, for the next person who is sitting in their car in a Kingdom Hall parking lot right now, wondering if leaving will destroy them or save them. Your story may be the one they need to read tonight. If this video meant something to you, subscribe. Share it with someone who needs it. And remember, no matter what you were told, silence is not the same as judgment from God. Sometimes silence is just the sound of a person learning, for the very first time, how to hear their own voice. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.